They arrived without warning. Their ships did not burn through the sky. They simply appeared, silent, obsidian wedges against the stars. The first proclamation came moments later. It was broadcast on every channel. It flooded every network across Earth and her colonies. You were on the bridge of the orbital defense station, steadfast. You watched the alien herald appear on your main screen. It was a tall creature. It was encased in golden armor, etched with impossible geometry. Its voice was not a voice. It was a symphony of resonating chimes. The translation software struggled, then settled. The message was clear. They were the ascendancy. Their empire was ancient. Their laws were absolute. They measured all things by a code of honor. They saw our sprawling, chaotic worlds. They saw our art and our arguments. They saw our messy, beautiful existence. They called it an affront to cosmic order. They demanded our immediate and unconditional submission. We were to become a vassal state. We would adopt their laws. We would serve their honor-bound empire. The broadcast ended with an image of their unbending standard, a promise of glory for the compliant and ruin for the defiant. You stood on the bridge of the steadfast. The silence that followed was heavier than any armor. Every officer, every technician looked to you, not for an order, but for a sign of what humanity would do. You looked back at the blank screen where the herald had been. You felt a cold certainty rise within you. They had measured honor. You knew, in that instant, we would have to measure survival. You were summoned to the high command bunker, deep beneath the mountains of North America. It was a place built for the end of the world. Now it was the nexus of our first interstellar decision. The room was stark and gray. The faces around the holographic table were grim. Generals and admirals, elected leaders and intelligence chiefs. Everyone who mattered was there, or was patched in from a distant post. The debate was brutally short. No one spoke of surrender. No one considered kneeling. The Ascendancy's proclamation was an insult we could not answer with words. Their demand was a cage we would never enter. The question was not if we would fight. It was how we would deliver the message. A formal declaration of war felt wrong. It felt like playing their game, by their rules. You remember the quiet voice of Admiral Thorne, a man who had seen combat in the outer system skirmishes. He proposed the message, not a treaty, not a debate. It was to be our quiet answer, a promise of pain delivered in the void's own language. The leaders voted. The decision was unanimous. You were tasked with transmitting it. Back on the steadfast, you keyed in the sequence. It was a simple package of data. It contained our complete, unedited history, all of our wars, all of our famines, all of our plagues and our recoveries, our darkest moments and our most stubborn triumphs. It was a testament to our sheer refusal to die. At the end of the data stream was a single, newly recorded audio file, a human heartbeat, steady and unbroken, and then a simple phrase in their own language. We are humanity. We do not kneel. Come and break yourselves upon us. They chose the colony on Kepler 186F for their lesson, a world we called Vantage. It was a green world, a jewel of the expansion era. 5 million souls lived there. They were farmers, scientists, and families. They were the best of us. The Ascendancy fleet arrived in perfect formation. 100 ships of the line. Their golden hulls gleamed against the blue-white sun. They did not hail the planet. They simply began. You watched the feeds from your command center. The data streamed in, cold and terrible. The Ascendancy's weapons were precise. They called it an honorable correction. They targeted infrastructure first. power grids, communication hubs, spaceports. They surgically dismantled the colony's ability to function. They expected panic. They expected a plea for mercy. They wanted the rest of humanity to watch and learn, to see the price of defiance. But Vantage did not break. The reports you saw were not of chaos. They were of organized resistance. Citizens with mining lasers fired on descending shuttles. Farmers used atmospheric processors to create storms. They fought with a fury the ascendancy could not comprehend. They fought for their homes, not for some abstract code of honor. The ascendancy's response was to escalate. Their precise strikes became orbital bombardments. The feeds went dark one by one. The last message you received was from the militia commander, a retired Earth Force sergeant. Her voice was calm over the static. "We're not kneeling," she said. "Tell them we never knelt." The loss of Vantage was a scar on our soul. But it did not break us. It did not create fear. It forged our resolve into something harder than any starship hull. It was their first lesson to us, and our last lesson in restraint. Our first move was not a grand fleet battle. That would have been suicide. Their ships were faster, stronger, and better shielded. We could not win a fight on their terms. So you helped draft the new plan. A plan born from weakness and desperation. We would not fight like a star-born empire. We would fight like scavengers, like ghosts in their perfect orderly machine. The target was a gas processing station in the Zephyr Nebula. It was a massive, automated facility. It refined the exotic fuels their honor fleet required. To them, it was a piece of industrial equipment, unglamorous, unworthy of a significant guard. They left only 3 destroyers to patrol the area. They believed no one would dare strike such a target. It was dishonorable. It was beneath a true warrior. They had a lot to learn about us. You watched the mission unfold from a remote command post. Our ships were little more than refitted miners. We called them Spectres. They were stripped down to the frame, loaded with sensor decoys and our best stealth technology. They did not burn hard and fast. They drifted through the nebula's thick clouds. They moved like predators stalking their prey, a tactic they would have called cowardly. We called it smart. The Spectres didn't even fire a shot at the warships. They deployed a swarm of kinetic mines, not powerful enough to breach a capital ship's armor, but more than enough to shred the unshielded processing plant. The station ruptured in a silent, expanding blossom of fire. The destroyers, caught completely by surprise, were helpless. They could only watch as their vital fuel supply turned to incandescent vapor. It was a small victory, a tiny pinprick, but it was a message. We were not going to fight for honor. We were going to fight to win, and we would start by bleeding them dry. The attack on the fuel depot sent a ripple through their empire. They could not comprehend the strategy. To them, war was a sacred ritual. It was fought between warriors in designated arenas of space. Hitting a supply line was like poisoning the water before a duel. It was unthinkable. They responded in the only way they knew how. They declared a formal war. Their high commander broadcast another message. It was full of pomp and ceremony. He outlined the rules of conflict. He declared specific star systems as fields of battle. He challenged our finest champion to single combat. He even specified the correct times for orbital bombardment. He seemed to think war was a highly regulated sport. You and your command staff listened to the broadcast. One of your junior officers started laughing. He couldn't help it. The sheer absurdity was too much. This was our chance to sow some real chaos. You soon learned we would follow none of their rules. Our answer to their declaration was silence. We sent no champions. We did not mass our fleets in their honorable kill boxes. Instead, our scavenger fleets went to work. We hit their long-range sensor arrays. We raided their automated repair docks. We deployed computer viruses into their navigation beacons. Every target was civilian. Every target was undefended. Every target was essential to their war machine. They called us cowards. They called us primitives. They filled the public channels with condemnations. They could not understand that this was our strategy. We were not trying to meet them blade to blade. We were dismantling the arm that held the blade. You felt a grim satisfaction. They wanted a pageant of honor. We were giving them a war of logistics, a war they had no idea how to fight, a war they were already losing. Our ships were old. They were relics from border conflicts and anti-piracy patrols. Against their golden armada, they were glass cannons. Your fleet, the Third Perimeter Group, was a museum of has-beens. But you knew that a ghost doesn't need armor. It just needs to be unseen. We turned our outdated fleets into phantoms. Every ship was refitted. Engines were muffled. Hulls were coated in sensor-absorbent paint. We became hunters in the dark spaces between the stars. The Ascendancy moved their fleets in massive, stately formations. They traveled along predictable star lanes. Their movements were telegraphed, proud and foolish. They were lions, and they expected their prey to stand and fight. We became wolves. Your fleet's first real mission under this new doctrine was a convoy raid. 20 of their massive freighters. They were hauling refined armor plating to their forward base. They had a light escort of only 5 warships. The escort expected a head-on assault. You commanded the operation from your flagship, the Revenant. You didn't attack the warships. You ordered your fleet to deploy a new weapon, a gravity tether. It was designed for towing asteroids. But it worked just as well on slow-moving freighters. Your ships darted in from the system's dark edge. They latched onto the freighters. Then they engaged their drives at full power, pulling in opposite directions. The result was chaos. The freighters were torn from their formation. They were dragged into each other. The escort ships couldn't get a lock. They were firing into a tangled mess of their own supply chain. 2 of the freighters collided. Their reactors breached. The explosion took an escorting warship with it. We didn't destroy the convoy. We just made them do it for us. Then, as quickly as we appeared, your fleet vanished back into the darkness. They were left with wreckage, confusion, and a dawning sense of unease. They believed our strategy was primitive. They ran simulations. They analyzed our attack patterns. Their finest military minds concluded we were erratic, desperate. They thought our success was simple luck, a series of random, cowardly strikes that would eventually stop. Their commanders filed reports. They assured the throne that human tactics were easy to predict. They said we fought without discipline, without a guiding principle. What they failed to understand was our guiding principle. It was the only one that mattered: survival. We didn't have a centuries-old code of war. We had the collective experience of a species that had clawed its way to the top, a species that knew the value of a broken rule, a species that understood that the real fight is never fair. You sat in a strategy session, reviewing their intercepted communications. Their arrogance was almost funny. They couldn't grasp tactics born from desperation. They expected us to build bigger ships. We built faster, stealthier ones. They expected us to meet their battle lines. We slipped past them and broke their toys. One of their leading tacticians, a noble named Lord Varelian, wrote a lengthy analysis. He called our methods the spasms of a dying creature. He was certain we would burn ourselves out. He couldn't have been more wrong. We were not dying. We were adapting. We were learning. Every one of their honorable maneuvers taught us a new way to be dishonorable. We turned their strengths into weaknesses. Their rigid formations were easy to flank. Their reliance on centralized command was easy to disrupt. Their code of honor was a straitjacket. It kept them from seeing the war we were actually fighting. They were playing star science chess. We were flipping the board over and hitting them with it. High Commander Yorick was in charge of the Outer Reach campaign. He was a celebrated warrior of the Ascendancy, a veteran of 100 glorious conquests. He was tasked with rooting out your phantom fleet. He vowed to bring you to a decisive, honorable battle. He brought his entire battle group to the Onyx Nebula, a place where our raids had been particularly effective. He expected you to run, or to face him and be annihilated. You did neither. You knew his ships had powerful, long-range energy weapons, but they generated immense heat. They needed to periodically vent that heat through massive radiator fins. It was a tiny window of vulnerability. So you laid a trap, a cowardly human trick. You positioned a single small corvette as bait. It was broadcasting a fake distress signal deep inside a dense asteroid field. It was an obvious trap. Too obvious. Yorick, blinded by his own arrogance, believed you thought him a fool. He thought the real trap was that there was no trap. He sent his flagship, the Unbending Will, into the asteroid field. He left the rest of his fleet behind. He wanted the personal glory of the kill. As his ship closed in, you gave the order. Your hidden ships didn't fire weapons. They fired lasers. Not weaponized lasers. Just simple, high-intensity targeting lasers. The kind used for asteroid mining. Hundreds of them. They all focused on the Unbending Will's radiator fins. The effect was instantaneous. The fins, already glowing hot from a previous volley at a ghost target, absorbed the extra energy. They superheated. They began to melt and deform. Alarms must have shrieked across Yorick's bridge. His ship couldn't vent heat. His weapon system shut down. His engines overloaded. The mighty flagship was crippled. Not by a torpedo. Not by a glorious final stand. It was hobbled by a handful of glorified flashlights. Yorick was forced to retreat in shame. His own people's punishment for such a failure was absolute. He was stripped of his rank in command. He was sent to a penal colony. His shame was broadcast for all to see. You watched the recording of Yorick's demotion ceremony. You saw the ritual breaking of his honor blade. You saw the cold, unforgiving faces of his superiors. And in that moment, you came to understand a fundamental truth. The Ascendancy did not know fear, not true, gnawing terror. They knew discipline, they knew honor and shame. But the cold dread of an unseen enemy, an enemy that does not play by any rules, that was new to them. Fear was a weapon. It was a tool they had never encountered. It was a concept they had no defense against. You decided it was time to teach them. Our psychological operations went into high gear. We stopped just destroying their supply lines. We started leaving calling cards. On the wreckage of a raided freighter, we left a looping audio file, the sound of human laughter. In a hacked navigation beacon, we replaced the standard star charts with images of predators from Earth's history. Wolves and sharks and spiders. We wanted them to feel hunted. We wanted them to jump at shadows in the void. We engineered ghost signals that mimicked their own ships. Fleets would divert to investigate, only to find empty space. Their patrols grew jumpy. They started firing on sensor ghosts. wasting precious energy and ammunition. The perfect order of their fleets began to fray at the edges. Mistrust grew between their commanders. Was that flicker on the screen a human ghost ship, or just a sensor glitch? Their rigid doctrine had no answer for this. How does an honor code defeat an enemy that attacks your sanity? You saw it in their battle reports. Their language started to change. Words like unsettling and unpredictable appeared more frequently. They were learning the lesson. They were learning that there are fates worse than a glorious death in battle. They were learning to be afraid of the dark, and we were the dark. Our greatest deception was yet to come. High Command approved the most audacious plan of the war. We called it the Trojan offering. For weeks, our phantom fleets had been hitting their supply convoys hard. We had pushed them to the brink. Their forward armies were running low on fuel, munitions, and parts. They were getting desperate. That was when we sent the message. It was from a supposedly rogue faction of humanity, a group that was appalled by our dishonorable tactics. This faction offered to surrender. As a gesture of peace, they would hand over their entire fleet of commercial freighters. 50 massive, slow-moving cargo haulers, filled with supplies that we claimed to have stolen from them. It was a lie, of course. A beautiful, intricate lie. The freighters were real. But they were not a peace offering. They were the jaws of a trap. The ascendancy, arrogant and desperate for a victory, debated the offer. You monitored their internal communications. Their honor code demanded they accept a worthy surrender. Their logic told them it was a much-needed resupply. Their pride made them believe that some humans, at least, understood their own inferiority. It was the perfect lure. A famous alien joke says their people cannot be conned. Apparently, that only works on a small scale. They eagerly accepted the gift. They dispatched a ceremonial delegation to meet our surrendered fleet in the Alpha Centauri system. The plan was monstrous. It was a strategy that would haunt you for years. To end the war, we had to land a blow so devastating it would shatter their will to fight. We needed to destroy their Grand Armada, the core of their military power, but they would never commit their entire fleet to a single battle. Not unless the prize was irresistible. The prize, we decided, would be Earth itself. A terrible plan was approved by a secret vote of the Unified Command. It involved sacrificing an entire star system, the Alpha Centauri system. It was our oldest colony, our first step to the stars, a place of immense historical and emotional value. It was also heavily fortified, a fact we had carefully hidden from the ascendancy. We began a slow, deliberate withdrawal of our fleets from the outer territories. We made it look like a disorganized retreat. We leaked fake intelligence, reports of political infighting, murmurs of a civil war brewing on Earth. We painted a picture of a human power structure on the verge of collapse. We made them believe that our homeworld was ripe for the taking. All they had to do was push. All they had to do was commit their full strength to one final, glorious charge. To land on Earth and plant their banner of honor would be the ultimate victory. It would end the war and secure their legacy forever. The lure was set. You were transferred to the command bunker on Luna, the nerve center for the entire operation. From there, you would watch them walk into the greatest trap in human history. The sacrifice of Alpha Centauri was a bitter price, but the alternative was the slow death of 1,000 cuts, or worse, subjugation. You gave the final authorization. The system was now bait. Their Grand Armada arrived, over 1,000 ships, a sea of golden light against the black. They bypassed the outer planets of Alpha Centauri. They drove straight for the inner system. Their target was the relay station that connected to the Sol system. Capturing it was the key to their invasion of Earth. Their formations were perfect. Their advance was majestic. They were enacting the final, triumphant chapter of their holy war. They had no idea they were marching into a tomb. You watched on the tactical display. The Ascendancy fleet moved past the orbit of Proxima Centauri b, a barren, rocky world we had seeded with our technology. As their final ships cleared the orbital plane, you gave a single-word command: ignite. Across the entire system, on every planetoid and moon, hidden weapons came online. They were not conventional weapons. They were gravity projectors, hundreds of them. The same technology we had used to tear their freighters apart. But this was on an impossible scale. The projectors fired in unison. They didn't target the ships. They targeted space itself. They warped the fabric of the cosmos, creating dozens of overlapping chaotic gravity wells. The effect on their perfect formations was instantaneous. Ships were violently ripped from their courses. They were slammed into each other. Shields flared and died against unimaginable gravitational shear. Their fleet, their pride, became a grinder of its own making. It was a blaze of impossible fire, light and energy erupting in total silence. Their command structure collapsed in seconds. Orders were useless. Evasive maneuvers were impossible. They were caught, not in a minefield or a nebula. They were trapped in a storm of pure physics, a storm we had summoned. You watched the green lights representing their ships wink out on your screen, dozens at a time, then hundreds. It was not a battle. It was an extermination. Their perfect formations became their glowing, incandescent grave. News of the great defeat traveled at the speed of light, but the shockwave of its meaning traveled faster. The Ascendancy's home system received the final data packet from their Grand Armada, the telemetry of their own destruction, the last sights and sounds of 1,000 warships dying in a gravity storm, for a society built entirely on the concept of inevitable victory. It was a mortal blow. The throne world fell into chaos. We monitored their internal broadcasts. The flawless, resonant chimes of their public addresses were replaced with frantic, discordant notes. The High Council turned on each other. Who was to blame? Who had allowed the primitive humans to achieve such a victory? The shame of the defeat was too great to bear. The only way to cleanse it was with blood. Their society began to devour itself. Factions that had been united for millennia now saw each other as rivals. Ambitious commanders saw a power vacuum. They saw a chance to seize the vacant throne. Civil war erupted. The glorious legions that had conquered galaxies now turned their honor blades on one another. Their empire, forged in honorable combat, was now being unmade by it. They were doing our work for us. Their foundation of victory had been a foundation of glass, and we had just thrown the final stone. The war ended with a great stillness. There was no final battle. No treaty was ever signed. We never sent a fleet to their home world. We didn't need to. Their last frantic broadcasts flickered out one by one. Their interstellar communications network went silent. The great, ancient empire of the Ascendancy was simply gone. They had broken themselves, just as we had promised. We sent probes into their territory, long-range stealthy explorers. They reported back with images of silent worlds. Their magnificent cities were intact. But they were empty. Their golden fleets drifted aimlessly in orbit around dead stars. It was as if a plague had swept through their civilization. But the plague was not a virus. It was a broken idea. The idea of their own invincibility. We broke their spirit. We had taken the one thing that held their society together, their belief in their own superior honor, and we had shown it to be worthless. We proved that survival was a stronger force than glory, that desperation was a sharper blade than any honor sword. The great stillness was our true victory, not the fires of Alpha Centauri, but the silence that followed, the silence of an enemy who had lost their very reason to exist. You stand on the observation deck of the newly christened orbital station, Vigilance. It hangs in the same spot where the Steadfast once did. You look out at the silent stars. It has been 10 years since the great stillness began. Humanity is rebuilding. We are expanding again. Cautiously, wisely. We are the sole power in this arm of the galaxy now. We won. We survived. But you often think about the cost. You remember the faces of the command staff who approved the sacrifice of Alpha Centauri. You remember the cold calculation of the Trojan offering. You remember weaponizing an enemy's own sanity against them. You look at your own reflection in the star-dusted glass. The face looking back at you is older, harder. It is the face of a survivor. Humanity endured because it refused to play by the rules. We won because we were willing to be the monsters they thought we were. We held a mirror up to their honorable crusade and showed them the ugly truth of conflict. You look out at the endless, peaceful dark. A question echoes in your mind. A question that will likely never leave you. In order to survive, what did humanity have to become?